Hello, everyone. So exactly 1 year ago, I was actually competing as a finalist in Miss Chinese Montreal. That's the local beauty pageant. Every Chinatown has one. Every diaspora community ever has one, actually. And so that beauty pageant, Miss Chinese Montreal, actually feeds its selected winner, or the queen, into Miss Chinese International in Hong Kong. In beauty pageants, contestants draw numbers that determines the order in which they come out onto the stage. Like ACAW, I'm the first to speak, and last year at the pageant, I also drew number 1, so I was the first to come out. What started as an investigative journalism project turned into extended performance on race and gender. Namely, what does it mean to act as the ideal of Chinese femininity in the Chinese diaspora? So all of this escalated into Miss Ruthless International project, the first iteration of which you see here behind me. The first iteration was an exhibition and series of programming, which I co-curated with David Zhu Bourguignon, who is here today. The show was called In Search of Miss Ruthless. It took place at Parasite in Hong Kong and featuring 23 participating artists. These artists interpreted pageantry as a promise of mobility that both regulates and class and engenders ethnicity. Inspired by the media infrastructure that frames a pageant queen, In Search of Miss Ruthless also included archival documents, an experimental audio guide, 2 web projects focused on the visual identity of Miss Ruthless, and the tenure of an experimental director of communications. This ruthless director of communications, Vivian Chin, also formed and created Ruthless Lantern, a gossip magazine that took the linguistic creativity from Hong Kong gossip rags to talk about issues concerning contemporary art. Those are from Vancouver. In the 1970s, Hong Kong saw the simultaneous rise of broadcast television and the formation of Miss Hong Kong, and later Miss Chinese International, which incorporated overseas pageants, connecting the diaspora communities through mainstream culture into a larger network of Chinese peoples. In recent memory, Miss Hong Kong 2015, Leeza Ahmady, used her platform to support the umbrella movement. Young Chinese Americans in the 1960s accused the San Francisco-based Miss Chinatown pageant of Orientalism and looked to the PRC's Iron Girls as a model for productivist feminism. Included in our archival section was a story about 1930s Shanghai-based actress Wang Ying. So this is a painting by Xu Beihong of Wang Ying in Put Down Your Whip. This painting had been declared missing in 1954, only to turn up in Hong Kong in 2007. An anonymous collector bought the work for $9.2 million US. That was the most expensive Chinese painting ever sold at that time. A Shanghai-based actress from the 1930s, Wang Ying made her name playing roles in films such as Goddess of Freedom, Sai Jinghua, and she won the latter role over the future Madame Mao, who would later persecute her during the Cultural Revolution. Another Shanghainese-based actress from the 1930s, Rang Lingyu, starred in New Woman. This is her behind me, a silent film that was released in February of 1935. This is the work she is known for. She plays an educated woman forced to death by an unfeeling society. The film is based on the life of another silent film actress who had committed suicide the year before. This was in the 1930s, a time when the idea of the film star came into being, a time when the establishment of beauty pageants in Shanghai and Hong Kong. This was when the Shanghai Longhua Airport was opened, which later was served by the Hong Kong Airways. There's little difference between being a starlet, an actress, and a sex worker at that time. Many people tried their chances in beauty pageants as a chance of class mobility, and it still is in many ways a form of that to kind of present your bachelorette eligibility to a wealthier male elite. The only difference now is that ability to jump classes is actually much more narrow. Miss Hong Kong, for example, requires a star reference letter, only accepts women under the age of 26, marital status single, and the contestant must not have ever been pregnant before. They tend to select contestants with elite educations, members of high society. So back in 1935, in just 1 month after the premiere of New Women, Rang Lingyu herself also commits suicide. Reportedly, she had written a suicide note that had read, "Gossip is a fearful thing." Her funeral procession was 3 miles long and had at least 300,000 people in it. 3 women committed suicide during that event, and every paper in Shanghai wrote a memorial to her. And the New York Times described it as the most spectacular funeral of the century. These systems of manufactured competition have turned women into automatons, dolls that fulfill the role of hospitality. Yet, as many say about technology, that system could possibly be neutralized. Rumor does not have to kill. So what I propose is actually this Miss Ruthless International. It could be a pageant, a network of artists, of researchers, curators. It was born in Parasite with the exhibition and can be carried forth through different iterations in different places. It would follow what pageants already do, which is to internationalize. Miss Ruthless International could be a union of sorts and a discursive platform that takes up the methods of gossip for better means. So the extended search for Miss Ruthless extends that space for collaboration. Usually Miss Friendship or Miss Congeniality is chosen through a secret ballot with the contestants. That's behind the stage. And so instead of actually holding this vote, Miss Ruthless could basically extend that period of friendship and for people to kind of work together. And I guess in searching for contestants, the search first started in Hong Kong. As a note, in 2001, there were very few fine art students in Hong Kong. Reportedly, there were 12 that graduated. And now, last year in 2016, there's like a few hundred, maybe up to 500. About 73% of those people are women. You don't see this reflected in the contemporary art world of Hong Kong. And yet, so where do those people go? And in talking to different professors, people have done studies tracing kind of fine art students in Hong Kong. It turns out that what's actually quite popular is to become a flight attendant. Little known fact, there was a dozen people who graduated last year in fine arts and actually became flight attendants. The most desirable being Cathay Pacific, as you know, a very fancy elite airline. The second being Dragon Air, and then things just kind of become not so desirable. And following, actually with Cathay Pacific, it also depends what route you fly, and the most desirable route, also fittingly, is to New York. Second would be the UK and Germany, and of course, actually, Southeast Asia, not desirable at all. So as you see, I mean, this whole kind of pageant network of the flight network follows the geopolitical map. So Marie-Pierre Boucher had once written, in the context of global mobility today, I'm having trouble seeing this. Information, bodies, and goods circulate the globe and even further into outer space. However, we face a paradigm. The more we move, the more we become sedentary. The modes of transportation that enable our global mobility are working against us, insidiously lessening our psychophysical mobility. The development of mobile architecture, cars, planes, and recreational vehicles, among others, is mischievously giving rise to a stationary society. We are a society whose inhabitants travel across the globe in the stationary comfort of a car or a plane, of a sofa or a bed. Globalization is thus, at least in part, the world becoming immobile. It's strange. I didn't make this. In a way, the idea of becoming still in the midst of globalization resonates with a particular form of isolation. No one wants to be, for example, stuck in an unwanted conversation on a commute, yet these two things have a lot in common. Conversation and commute are both work and not work, but also not work. The things that often being, that you can consider conversation a node in the production chain, but however, there's no relationship, economic or not, that cannot occur without exchange of words. Gabriel Tard had written, even when a traveler exchanges products with islanders whose language he does not know, these swaps only take place through the means of signs and gestures which are in the form of language. In addition, how did these needs for production and consumption, for sales and purchases, which have just been mutually satisfied by a trade, concluded thanks to conversation, arise? Most often, thanks again to conversations, which has spread the idea of a new product to buy or to produce from one interlocutor or another, and along with this idea, had spread trust into the qualities of the product or its forthcoming output, and finally, the desire to consume and you manufacture it. There is no manager more powerful than consumption, nor, as a result, any factor more powerful, though indirect, in production than the chatter of individuals in their idle hours. So as the necessary conditions for sentimentality, ruthlessness is the unrelenting fighting spirit in a field of emotional ambivalence. It is what allows for sentimentality to endure. Miss Ruthless stands between right and wrong, mainstream and populist. Ruthlessness, and what we search for in this pageant, is the antidote for those who hold marginalized positions in a society to interpret social life. Perhaps the search for Miss Ruthless can also hold spaces for queer life and illuminate histories of invisible labor. As pageants are perceived as apolitical spaces, they allow for prototyping of alternative forms of political participation. As you know, there's no one's really safe on a plane if it lands in the water. Contemporary artists explore moments of political connotation in beauty pageant history as stratagems for highly competitive art worlds that they occupy. Formally, beauty pageants are an infrastructure that rehearses political election. In the selection process, pageantry can feel like a spectacular eugenic project, yet it is not governed by a process of natural selection. Pageants require contestants to act unnaturally. To perform an ambiguous ideal, contestants are judged on their ability to appear as if they seamlessly inhabit the modes of performance required by broadcast television. So following the ruthlessness of Wang Ying, Runling Yu, Leeza Ahmady, young Chinese Americans in the 1960s, how do we form a form of gossip that can be feared? In thinking of how to strengthen networks of a Miss Ruthless International, how do we create forms of psychophysical mobility through the premise of gossip, which is formed on infrastructure, not representation? Following poet Helen Sizu, what if she were alive? What if, in looking at her, we animated her?